Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm ILTV Editor-in-Chief Maayan Hoffman. Last week on Insider, we looked at the probability of an all-out war with the North. This week, that option is still on the table as Israel and Hezbollah continue to fire rockets and other ammunition at each other across our border. A soldier has died in an operation in the Palestinian-controlled city of Tukharim in the West Bank. Terrorists fired around 20 rockets in one shot from Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip, an area that the IDF had effectively conquered 3 months ago. In Israel, there are riots in the streets over the Haredi draft bill, dissatisfaction with the current administration, and efforts to bring our hostages home. In America, President Joe Biden and rival candidate Donald Trump sparred last week, in part over who will be better for the state of Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, among many other statements yesterday, defended Biden's ceasefire plan and said this is the way to end the war. But the ball remains in Sinwar's court, and it is unclear that the terror leader will agree, making us no closer to ending the war and bringing our hostages home. Let's take a look at the clip.
I think the proposal that President Biden put forward is achievable, doable, which doesn't mean it will be achieved, doesn't mean it will be done, but it can be and it should be. And what we saw after he put out the proposal is quite remarkable. We've seen virtually the entire world come together in support of that proposal. Country after country standing up saying, yes, we support this. This is the way forward. This is the way to end the conflict in Gaza. This is the way to get the hostages home. This is the way to put us on a path to more durable security, more durable peace, a better future for Palestinians, for Israelis, and actually for the entire region. And so everyone came together in support, with one exception, and that was Hamas.
Joining me now in the studio to discuss these issues and what promises to be a lively debate is Jonathan Conricus, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy and a former IDF spokesperson. Welcome.
Thank you. Shalom.
Shalom. And we also have here American-Israeli journalist and senior contributing editor for JNS, Ruthie Blum.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. So I want to jump right into these questions because we have a lot to cover today. And I want to start with what happened yesterday. Yesterday, effectively, we saw 20 some odd or around 20 rockets be fired at once from Khan Yunis. Today already, the IDF has asked for residents to leave Khan Yunis so that they can operate and go back to a place that they effectively left in April. So Jonathan, I'm going to ask you the question that I think every one of us wants to know. Are we winning this war or not?
I think the IDF is making very good progress, but we are not done yet. And it will take many more months of fighting and perhaps years of combat on the ground, not at this intensity, but combat on the ground, in order to finally defeat, in a military sense, Hamas on the ground. You know, the rockets that were fired, the whole purpose of firing rockets is exactly to get us talking about it. It is a very simple and crude weapon of terrorizing civilians. The whole aim of it is just to trigger the alarms. They know that the rockets will be shot down out of the sky by the Iron Dome. I don't think that they even think that they will be able to kill Israelis with them. They just want to send that message of we are still here. Now, we should anticipate that this will go on for a while. Khan Yunis is still full of Palestinians. It is still full of terrorists. Wherever there are Palestinian civilians, Hamas hides between them, and we should anticipate there to be lots more combat and conflict until we strangle Hamas's supply of weapons, until we take out their leaders, and until we take out enough combatants and their infrastructure and simply impress upon them that there's no use in fighting and that the only way for them to survive is to surrender.
Well, it's interesting what you say because we keep talking about a day after plan, and it seems like the day after from what you're describing is actually quite a while away. The U.S. has complained that we don't have a good enough day after plan. In fact, the U.S. has said that they aren't so comfortable with some of the things that we've put out and that we need to be much more organized in what's going to happen when we do effectively sign some kind of ceasefire deal. So I want to ask both of you, and Ruthie, I want you to start to think about that day after if we do ever manage to end this war. If you were Prime Minister, what would it look like in Gaza?
Military rule, Israeli military rule until further notice. Perhaps until apples grow on cherry trees. We cannot allow another October 7th. We weren't supposed to have allowed that in the first place. We know who Hamas is. We know that Hamas is popular also in the West Bank. We know that peace is not in the cards and therefore we have to have control, and especially the ability to go in and out when necessary.
Do you agree with that sentiment?
I think it's very much true, but I think that what we have to add on to that is a roadmap for what we intend and what we want, how we want to shape the future of Gaza as a reflection of how we want our future to be.
But you're the Prime Minister, so you give me that roadmap. What does it look like?
I think that what we have to aim for is to build a coalition under U.S. leadership and with very significant U.S. buy-in with local Arab countries that will give Israel the legitimacy, the local and regional legitimacy that we need in order to govern Gaza for the immediate time being. I don't see any scenario whereby Israel finishes the fighting and then says, okay, we're done, we're withdrawing. That makes absolutely no sense, and I think it's a ridiculous proposal that people say Israel should do that. Makes no sense. Israel will have to control the borders, enjoy freedom of operation, as Ruthie said. But it's very important to have a goal in mind, because just to say, okay, we run things now, comes with a lot of responsibility.
Well, and also the Palestinians living in Gaza don't necessarily want that, because what all the polls are showing is that they don't want an international force. Arab Israelis do, but the Palestinians in both the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip have said that idea is not really on the table for them.
Let's speak about opinions. Opinions are very important, and when we poll different constituents, I think we have to be cognizant of which is the most important audience. Palestinians in Gaza are the most important when it comes to influencing their thinking, because there won't be a day after in Gaza if there even is a small percentage of a chance that Hamas comes back to power.
Well, Hamas is still in power, Ruthie, wouldn't you say?
Still is.
Oh, I agree. And but what I don't agree with that everyone is saying is that the poor civilians of Gaza are just too afraid of Hamas to do anything, to try to overthrow Hamas, etc. Of course they're afraid. But, you know, during the Holocaust, Gentiles were terrified of the Nazis, and yet several of them hid Jews, did the right thing. Not a single Gazan is doing the right thing. That's number one. Number two, the only way to have a shift in Gaza is to re-educate the population against terrorism. And that takes a lot of time. But anytime I've said, look, so maybe what we have to do is take over the education system, it's, oh, you know, that's like some kind of fascist propaganda control. So I don't know what we're supposed to do, but I know one thing. There is no way the Palestinian Authority can rule there, because they are terrorists, and Fatah participated in the October 7th massacre and still funds the Hamas terrorists.
It's fascinating. You know, we have a similar situation, you know, in some sense going on up north, because Hezbollah is part of the state of Lebanon, and Lebanon is effectively not doing anything to root out Hezbollah, and therefore we continue to see this escalation. Blinken yesterday, when he gave his address to the Brookings Institute, what he said was that we have effectively lost sovereignty over northern Israel. And it's true, 60,000 civilians are not living in their homes. Ruthie, how do we get it back? You know, what is the solution? If you can answer that, but I also want to hear your thoughts.
First of all, I think that's the only statement that Blinken has ever made that I've agreed with, which is that we've lost sovereignty in the north. In effect, we have, because, you know, our border has moved southward thanks to Hezbollah, and this is an untenable situation. And what I know we cannot do is have some other useless written agreement, as we had Resolution 1701 that didn't work for 5 minutes because the international forces saw one Hezbollah, you know, terrorist walk by and they fled. And that is going to happen again. You're talking about an Iranian proxy. I think the only way to restore any Israeli's faith is militarily. I'm sorry, we have to kill a lot of people. That's the truth.
You agree with that? Because, I mean, killing a lot of people, this is, you know, you were an IDF spokesperson. You know what goes on in the IDF. We are an ethical army, but we sometimes have to kill a lot of people, or at least be able to take out terrorism. So, Jonathan, what do you believe? How do we do this?
It's about defeating an enemy. And currently, the Israeli strategy for the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, since the Second Lebanon War and during the Second Lebanon War, wasn't about defeating the enemy. It was about containing the situation, about containing violence and having extended periods of no fighting between the fighting, which probably has not been such a good strategy when you analyze it with the benefit of hindsight, where on October the 7th, we woke up, many people woke up, others have been saying it for quite a while, but many people woke up to the reality that Israelis are either abducted or could be abducted and killed from Gaza or from Lebanon. The challenge here is that we're talking about a much higher stakes environment. Whereas Hamas can be contained, we can strangle their logistics, we can strangle their supply of weapons, and it is a geographical unit that we can dominate. It takes a lot of efforts. Sadly, we have casualties, and it takes hard, persisting fighting in order to get the job done. But we have tremendous men and women fighting on the ground who are doing this. With Hezbollah, it's a different magnitude. The threat towards Israeli civilians is much bigger. And
because the rockets go further and they're better?
They're bigger, they go further, they are more accurate, and they're more lethal. Okay. And Hezbollah has many more rockets in comparison
that
to... That
foreign policy article said about 1 million rockets in the arsenal.
Yeah, that doesn't seem right to me.
Seems too many.
The assessment that I'm aware of is between 130 and 150,000 rockets of varying calibers, ranges, and precision. Okay. Some of them nation-state capabilities, like precision-guided missiles capable of striking all over Israel. Israel is aware of this, and I think that's the main reason why we haven't so far decided to launch an all-out offensive against Hezbollah. I do agree that for Israelis to be able to go back home, there needs to be a totally different security architecture. 1701 did not provide security for Israelis and provided the world with a false sense of lack of war or progress towards peace. I know because I served on behalf of Israel at the UN headquarters. I also liaised with UN peacekeeping forces. And so many times I would know of events that happened on the ground, read UN reports and ask myself, is this report speaking about the event that happened? Because the report reflects something that didn't happen. And that's just one part of the problem. The issue here is about timing. I sense that Israel is gearing up and readying itself to do what it has to do in order to safeguard Israeli civilians to allow them to go back to their homes, but perhaps the timing isn't quite yet there. I think that the defense establishment wants to focus and finish the job in Gaza first.
But you just said that's going to take a very long time.
No, what will take a few more months is high-intensity operations, Rafah tunnels, and perhaps another sweep through Khan Yunis. But essentially, after that, after the tunnels in Rafah are severed, then the strategic picture will change, and hopefully we will get fortunate and take out some of the leaders on the way.
But then what do? Move right to the north? Our fighters, our soldiers have been fighting effectively for 9 months.
They have. And there's fatigue, there's attrition. Our brave men who have been fighting on the battlefield, our regular troops, our reservists, some of them, the regular troops have been out fighting almost relentlessly for 8 or 9 months, and that is almost unheard of. Reservists have left everything back and are fighting, some of them 4, 5, 6 months in combat, also with a heavy burden. I think what is needed is first and foremost a different Israeli strategy that clearly defines where do we want to be vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis Hezbollah, vis-a-vis Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Where are we now and where do we want to be in 2 and 5 years? The common denominator here is that we have to have a different strategy regarding Iran. If we don't address the Islamic Republic of Iran's ability to continue to send weapons and to fund terror organizations that are building themselves along our borders and threatening our civilians, if we don't force them to change their strategy, there's no reason for Iran to change its strategy, and the consequence will be that our civilians and we will continue to suffer from that violence.
Well, and that's very interesting because we actually know that Hezbollah had a very similar plan about 10 years ago that they didn't carry out, and a similar plan to October 7th. We saw what happened in our country on October 7th. And as Ruthie has just, pointed out, that if we don't do something pretty severe, it is likely that we could, God forbid, see something not maybe the same, but similar to October 7th. But there is also another area in Israel where we are seeing Iranian influence and more extremism, and that's the West Bank. I mean, just yesterday we had a situation where, again, in Tulkarm, a soldier was killed, and it was a UAV, I think, explosion. And we're seeing that there's, in the polls, that the Palestinians living in the West Bank are feeling very extreme and excitable. This morning, there was a shooting today in Har Bracha, up in the Shomron. So, Ruthie, what do we do about the West Bank? I mean, let's talk about that. What is the future of Judea and Samaria?
Okay, well, I think these are all interconnected, and they're connected to Iran. And unfortunately, we had an administration in Washington that decided to go back to the nuclear deal with Iran, which was a huge mistake because it gave Iran tons of money with which to continue funding all these terrorist groups, including in the West Bank. So that's first of all. I mean, the Iranian regime was pretty much starved for a while, and then in come Biden, Blinken, and their buddies.
But Blinken said we don't have sovereignty up north, so we can agree with him on something.
Oh, we agree with him on that, but it's his fault. Okay, I would say, yes, well, thank you very much for pointing that out, since you had a lot to do with that. What will happen with the West Bank? Again, I'm saying all the time, I have thought all along that we needed to annex it. I'm in a minority opinion here and there, but I will say one thing. I agree with you about the fatigue, the battle fatigue, but unfortunately, I think it's coming from the chief of staff, the general staff, and not the soldiers. I know reservists in my own family. I know soldiers and reservists. They don't feel, of course, they're tired. They're in battle, and yes, they have a lot of difficulties with their businesses back home, etc. But I'm more concerned about the fatigue from the higher echelons, who are already saying, well, we can't really win, and we can't really... It's as though our army turned woke, and our defense minister turned woke. And I think that's very, very worrisome, because the deterrence, the one thing that it deters to some extent, is our strength. And weakness that we show in that regard is very dangerous.
Well, and I'm assuming that some of that is also coming because of the international arena, and especially from the United States. I mean, as you said, Blinken, most of what he says is not aligned with what you just talked about, and certainly not annexation. There's a big push for a two-state solution out of the United States, despite what happened on October 7th. And we had this, debate that happened last week. And Biden got up there, President Biden got up there, and he really touted his foreign policy. Blinken yesterday also, he said, Biden is great, the world respects him, he's fabulous. Now, Trump, of course, in that same debate, what did Trump do? Trump said, no, my policy is the best. Well, which one is the best? I'm curious, Jonathan and Ruthie, what do you feel is best for us? We have an election coming up in November. If these are our candidates, we don't know, right, given the situation in the last debate, but if these are the two candidates, who is effectively better for Israel, and is the foreign policy good for us that Biden has carried out, or not so much? Jonathan, you start.
Yeah, before we speak about the Americans, I think we have to have order in our own house. And what I find most lacking, before I criticize the military and generals and chief of staff and others, what I think our biggest problem is a lack of a coherent strategy, a failed strategy for 15, 20 years regarding Gaza, Hamas, and Egypt, and an equally losing strategy regarding Hezbollah. And first and foremost, we need to address that, and not only what have we done so far, but where do we want to be? What is our plan? And when we speak about Iran and the US and Israel, etc., I'm still amazed by the fact that 2.5 days, almost 3 days after Iran, the sovereign leader of Iran makes a blatant threat, and he says, we will destroy Israel if Israel decides to attack Hezbollah. And it goes unnoticed. I haven't heard a single Israeli official respond to it with anything of substance.
Well, I think there was this report that we have some great weapon or something that we
I'm talking more about the diplomatic...
the official statement.
Yeah, the official statement, and just that it's part of the... It goes unnoticed that we, a sovereign country, is threatened by another country with extinction, and nobody bats an eye.
But
our elected leadership doesn't say anything about it.
Well, Jonathan, you're right. On the other hand, I think we've become jaded. Do you know how many years, how many decades Iran has been saying, we're going to wipe you off the map, we're going to wipe you off the map. Now, in April, there was an attack from Iran, which was just not a real one if there had been an intention for a serious one. that would have been, what would have happened would have been way worse. I was appalled that our reaction to that attack was to say, okay, it's over now. And America said, look, we all got together and we helped Israel. I was pretty appalled because I've been thinking for many years that we have to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, I'm not a military person, so do I know if we have the capability of bunker busters and all that? No, I can't say that. I know what we need to do. That doesn't mean we have the capability of doing it.
Well, maybe you know, do we have the capability?
Yes, but first and foremost, what we need to do is to define to ourselves and to our allies, and then indirectly to our enemies, what our intentions are and what our strategy is. So far, we haven't held Iran accountable for their acts of aggression against us. So before we speak about American presidents elected, etc., let's first have our elected leaders who have been in power for very, very long time and who have been touting Iran and many other things for a very long time with zero results. What is our strategy? How can we impress upon the Iranians that it isn't acceptable for them to call for our destruction? That, I think, is super important, because I don't think it should be possible for any Middle Eastern country to threaten Israel with distinction and not suffer any consequences.
So
it starts with that.
Correct. And we're running out of time. I'm going to have to ask you just this last question, and really in 30 seconds or less, I want you to answer. If we could solve one conflict for Israel today, of all the conflicts that we just named in this program, which one is most important? Jonathan, 30 seconds, and then Ruthie.
The most important one that I cannot currently see a solution to is our conflict with the Palestinians. We will have to solve it somehow. Currently, with the mindset of Palestinians, a total disdain for peace and acknowledging our right to live in our ancestral homeland. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening now. It is, however, the most important thing that we need to address demographically and territorial-wise. What we should be doing is focusing on Iran, holding them accountable for their aggression against us. Lots of troubles will go away when we do.
Ruthie.
I agree that we have to tackle the Iranian issue. I think the Palestinians are secondary, as the Abraham Accords proved. Peace, or whatever you want to call it, quiet, does not pass through the Palestinians. Only war passes through the Palestinians. Our standing up to Iran and to Washington is what caused the Abraham Accords countries to want to join forces with us. And any weakness we show and any weakness America shows just makes them think that maybe they've tied themselves to the wrong horse.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here. Ruthie, Jonathan, thank you for being here today. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Let's win this war and bring those hostages home.